All right.
Okay. All right.
Let's talk about gaps in employment. So it says include dates you were in school, volunteering, care,
So absolutely.
caregiver, etc.
When you have a resume, it's very important that you do not have any gaps. When I say gaps, gaps in time. So we don't want to see that between this job and the most recent job, there's a 2-year gap, there's a 6-year gap. I've talked to our HR specialists about this, and from their perspective, they really don't care. What they're looking at is accomplishments you have in your resumes to qualify you or not for this job. If there's a gap, it's not something they're really concerned about. I tell people I don't like it. I don't think it's the best presentation of yourself, because who might be interested and might be concerning to is the actual hiring manager. If you do well, your resume is written well, it gets to a hiring official, and you're on the short list, and now they're looking through the different resumes. If they see a 6-year gap, like most of us, they're going to assume the worst. They might assume that you were in prison. You might, they might assume that you were just staying home, hanging out of the house, playing video games, which is also a poor reflection of yourself.
Right.
So we want to make sure that you're showing some type of activity. For example, I've worked with people a guy worked with 6 years job gap. He resigned from his former job. He found out when he found out his father was dying of cancer. So what he did for that last 6 years was his father's caregiver.
So would you then put that in there as for the gap?
Absolutely, I put it in there. You're not going to get work credit for it, but I would definitely put it in there to show what you were doing. And how you would do that, I could show some examples. You definitely want to show the timeline that you were doing that, maybe what city and state you were living in, and so on and so forth. So you definitely want to show account for that. Another thing, and this happened to me, there was 4 years I didn't work at all, right? I was a full-time student working on my bachelor's degree, and I focused on school. Many people do this. So there was a huge gap in my resume. Now that information, my education, is certainly going to show up at the bottom under education, but for the visual, as a hiring official or HR specialist is working their way down that resume, there's a 4-year gap. That's a huge chunk. I want to make sure at least explain that I was at university from this month and year to this month and year. This was my major, and at the bottom I could give more academic details. But we just want to fill that gap. Another thing that people many times don't do is, if there's a gap in actual full-time permanent employment, is they fail to list volunteer experience. In the federal government, volunteer experience is work experience. It's not something that goes on the bottom of your resume under extracurricular activities or affiliations or anything like that. It goes in the top under work experience. It's just work without compensation.
And you still list it in chronological order?
Yes, reverse chronological order. You still work your way down, and you will list, what role did you play? I was office assistant. I was, let's say you worked at the Goodwill or something, and you're working in a sorting facility, and you would also indicate there volunteer. So another part of the job you would also indicate that is you would have to indicate your salary. So you could indicate $0, or you would indicate volunteer status. And then 2, you would also indicate that in the hours a week that you volunteer. So whether you do 20 hours, 10 hours, you want to make sure you put it in there so you can get credit for it. So those are just a few examples. The last one I see, uncommon, but I've had it a couple of times, is some guy says, well, Greg, I didn't do any of those things. And I didn't do any of those things for 3 years. So we have the conversation, well, what were you doing? What was going on in your life? Come to find out, these 2 guys, one of them they actually both got hurt on the job, right? One guy fell off a ladder. He was a maintenance guy working for an apartment complex, fell off a ladder, and now he had 2 surgeries in that time span. He was obviously going to physical therapy a lot, other doctor's appointments a lot, so the guy couldn't work.
Right.
So now he has recuperated from that injury, now is fit to go back to work. So we want to make sure we indicate that he was recovering from an injury. Right. The other guy that happened to he was in a pretty bad car accident, and again, him too, it took him a few years to rehab from that to the point where he was able to go back to work.
Right.
So we indicate that recovering from injuries sustained in a car accident. And so again, you're not going to take up a whole bunch of room on your resume, but you just want to indicate that so there are no gaps in there, and then people are not, you know, second guessing what really happened to
Right.
you, or, you know, hopefully not thinking the worst, that you were locked up in jail, you know.